Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Queen Bee SP, for another chapter and the final chapter of Scientology Abuse at the Top, with my added commentary. Yes, this is the final chapter. Oh my goodness. And in looking this chapter over before I started this video, I realized that it's quite emotional for me because for several reasons. One, I reunite with my family for the first time in I don't know how long. Um, 2, Matt and I are exhilarated getting started in the real world. And 3, forced disconnection. And since I wrote this book, I lost my mom and I recently lost my dad. And so it brings back a lot of memories and everything. So it may be hard as I go through it. In fact, yesterday I recorded this video and I cried most of the way. And then when I went to put it on pause, it said, "Start your recording." So I never pushed start on record. But that's okay. You don't need to see a blubbering Amy, that's for sure. So I'll try to get through this with as much composure as possible. But again, thank you for joining me. And here we go with my next chapter. Chapter 15. Breaking out of Scientology's grip. There was a scurry the next morning. I could see out the laundry room window that the RPF in charge was talking to Matt, and by the way they were both checking their watches, I could tell he was being given instructions to meet somewhere at a specific time. A relief came over me as I realized we were finally going to be free. I saw the staff security chief pull up. Matt and the RPF in charge got in the car and drove out the front gate. I wondered where they were going and if Matt was coming back. I knew Matt would never leave me behind. I desperately wanted to know what was going on. No sooner did those thoughts cross my mind did OSA staff member Kathy True enter the laundry room and say, "Come with me." We went into a room close by, and she informed me that I had been booked on a flight to Seattle, Washington, where my mother and father live, and that the plane was taking off in a few hours. She handed me $500 in severance pay. I thought, I'm supposed to restart my life with a measly $500? Kathy then said I needed to pay for the plane ticket and took back over half of what she just gave me. I didn't have a kind thought in my mind right about then, but at least I'd have Matt to team up with. I asked where Matt was and how I could get a hold of him so I could tell him where I was going and how to contact me. Kathy said she didn't know anything about it. Total lie. I thought, once I'm off the property and no longer under Scientology's authority, I'll find him and we'll get back together. I just have to get out first. Kathy said that there's one more thing to brief me on, as she pulled out a piece of goldenrod paper. At the top it said, "Suppressive person declare, Amy Mortland Scobee." I was being declared an SP. I had just cooperated for nearly 2 months to route out properly, sign all of the bogus papers that were full of exaggerated claims of my extensive crimes and poor performance, and sat through hours of videoed confessionals while eating beans and rice until I felt like they were seeping out of my pores, and it was all for naught. I had a ticket to Seattle, yet now that I was declared, I was not supposed to have any connection with my mom and stepdad who live in the Seattle area since they were still in Scientology. Kathy said my mom would be contacted and briefed on my status and reassured that I would rapidly get back in good standing so that I can see my family again. She said, "Meantime, you can go to your dad's house as he's not a Scientologist." I love how they think that they can dictate what I'm going to do, especially after they hand me an SP declare. My thought, get me out of here fast. I'm going to see my mom before they get to her and feed her a bunch of bull about what happened in my status. We put my luggage in Kathy's car, minus a few trunks of clothes that were to be shipped separately, and we started driving to the airport. I made Kathy stop where I could get a haircut, so I didn't arrive on my father's doorstep looking like I was just released from a concentration camp. One does not have access to beauty parlors while on the RPF. So, with $150 to my name, I arrived to the airport with just a few minutes before my flight. I didn't even have time to call my dad to let him know I was coming. I remember another thing that I did with my measly $150 is at the airport, I stopped inside one of those gift shops and I got myself a watch because I didn't even know what time it was. Anyway, Kathy was there being patient with me while I did that because she was supposed to see me onto the flight. Whatever. I made it onto the airplane toward home. What a relief. I remember those doors closing and the plane taking off, thinking, I am actually leaving Scientology right now. I am on my way home, like my real home, where my family lives in Seattle. I couldn't believe it. 25 years away, 25 solid, painful years away from my loving family, and I was on my way home. The flight I was put on had a very short layover, so when we changed planes, I ran to the payphone to call my dad to let him know I was arriving in a few hours and needed to be picked up at the airport. I told him I was coming home to stay, and I'd explained everything when I got there. My dad was in shock. He had not seen me in many, many years, and he had resigned to the fact that I'd be in the church for the rest of my life and only occasionally write or possibly visit, like in the preceding 25 years. I walked off the plane and down all of the long corridors of the Seattle airport. Oh Lord, did I miss my dad. I could feel a huge surge of happiness come over me as I got closer to the exit. I could see, okay, this is where tears happen. I could see my dad at the end of the passage. I started to cry. I ran into his arms and gave him a hug like there was no tomorrow. I'm home. This especially hurts now that I recently lost my dad, and but he always had his house open and said if I was ever going to come home, he'd be there for me no matter what. So, and he was. What the hell is happening? My dad said with a huge grin on his face. I reminded him of the time he told me when I was 16 years old that if I was ever in trouble or decided to leave the church and come back, he'd be there for me. I said, this is the time. I'm home for good. We grabbed my bags and headed to his house. Luckily, he had a guest bedroom I could stay in until I got up and running. We stayed up late that night, and I told Dad the whole story. He was so happy to have me back home. He explained how he had written off having a daughter. Aside from a few calls on holidays, always monitored so kept brief and bland, he never heard from me. My dad figured if I didn't want to be part of his life, then that was my choice. He said he had contemplated going to the authorities to get me to come back home, but decided that I was an adult. And as long as I said I was happy, he was happy for me. All I could do was cry. It must have been torture for a father to write off his only daughter to a church, which separates families and makes strangers out of one's closest siblings. I realized how my neglect over the years had such a bad effect. Yeah, at this point, I hadn't even seen my brother in 17 years. I never met either of his kids. And he's my only brother. He's my only sibling. And I didn't even know his wife that he'd been married to for, over a decade. Probably like 15 years or something by that point. He could have just turned his back on me, but didn't. He welcomed me with open arms and no questions asked. That's unconditional love. I could hardly sleep that night. Everything was racing through my head. I'm out, I'm free. I could stay up all night and watch movies. I could go out for a steak and lobster. I could drive anywhere and take as long as I wanted to get there. I could do any job I wanted. The whole world was wide open. Then my mind went back to my mom. I thought, I need to call her now. I got out of bed in the wee hours of the morning and went to the phone. My dad and stepmother were still in bed, so I tried to be quiet. I dialed my mom's number. "Hello," she said. "Hi, Mom, this is me, Amy." "What? What's happening? Where are you?" I yelled, "I'm home!" If anyone was sleeping in the house, they weren't anymore by that time. I told my mom that I was home for good, and I wasn't supposed to call her because I was now declared an SP. I told her that I didn't care about that quote unquote status. I said that I loved her and I missed her so much, and they couldn't keep us apart. I wasn't under their thumb anymore, and I needed to see her right away and tell her everything. We arranged that she would come pick me up that morning. I was so excited to see her. My mom and I have been best friends my whole life. Anyone who knew me at all in the church knew how much I loved my mom. Despite being in different locations while I was in the Sea Org, we wrote to each other all the time, and I shared her wonderful letters, poems, and short stories with my friends. One card she sent me made me cry every time I read it. I still have it. It reads, okay, Waterworks. Oh, hi, sweetheart. I don't know if I've ever validated you for the job you're doing and the decisions you've made in your life, but I want you to know how proud of you I am. I couldn't have asked for anything more than you've given us all by dedicating your life for this planet and all the billions of souls without a clue who, without you, wouldn't have a chance of any sort. They may never thank you, but I can. Thank you, sweet girl, from the bottom of my heart. Mom. I really didn't know that I was in a cult, you know, and we thought that we were working our guts out to, you know, help people have happy lives. When I received this card, all of the hardships I had endured over the years seemed worth it. At least I made my mom proud. Mom and I went out to a restaurant and I told her everything. She knew that I wasn't a suppressive person and said she would not disconnect from me. That was a wonderful first reunion, I can tell you. I didn't really explain it here other than we went to a restaurant. We picked a restaurant called Ivar's because in downtown Seattle, they have an Ivar's and it's fresh seafood. And we used to get fish and chips there when I was a kid. And so I really wanted to get fish and chips with my mom. So that's where we went. We went to her house so I could see her place. She lives in Covington, which is about 20 minutes away from my dad's house in Federal Way. She has a nice house with two great dogs. Yeah, Bo and Nia were their names. Suddenly, there was an unexpected knock at the door. I went into the back room while my mom answered. It was the ethics officer from the Seattle Church of Scientology. The ethics officer person told my mom that she had to brief her on something regarding her daughter and asked if she could come in. My mother said yes and showed her into the dining room. She had my mother sit down and explained that I had just been dismissed from staff and declared a suppressive person. My mother asked, "Do you have anything in writing on this?" The ethics officer said yes as she pulled out my suppressive person declare and handed it over to my mom. When she was done reading it, my mother asked, "So what does this mean?" The ethics officer told her that she could have no contact with me until I handled my status with the church, and that from what she understood, I planned to rapidly get back in the fold. Not on your life. The ethics officer explained how she herself had family she had to disconnect from. Oh, joy. And how it was hard but necessary. And it makes the person that's not in good standing work faster to handle their status so they can reconnect with their loved ones once again. You know, this is my biggest pet peeve, this forced disconnection. Anyway, in the back room, I was fuming. How dare they assume I'd just give up my family? I realized that I'm actually not living under their rules anymore. They can't force me to do anything. It's also so presumptuous of them to assume I would recant, come to my senses, and request forgiveness from them after first performing extensive amends and paying a large sum of money to them towards my freeloader bill, which are requirements one must fulfill to get back into good standing with the church. Realize every time I say church, I mean cult. You know that, right? A freeloader bill is what the Church Scientology issues to anyone who breaks their staff contract. It's a bill for all training and processing when received while on staff. The fact is, I did come to my senses. That's why I was out of the Sea Org and back home with my family. Go, Amy. The ethics officer left. My mom said she just pretended to play along, but had no intention of abiding by their rules. Not only had she already been practically disconnected from me for nearly 25 years while I was in the Sea Org, she had also gotten dissatisfied with the church herself. After serving 10 years as the management representative at the Seattle church, she had been removed unjustly. Also, her husband was constantly being demanded for donations at the local church, keeping him in a room for hours at a time until he would finally break down and pay, which actually put my mom and her husband into debt. Freaking greedy cult. So my mother and I agreed right then and there that we would see each other as often as we like, never let anyone stand between us, and she would just tell the church nothing about it. My top priority at this point was to make connection with Matt so we could reunite. I was so excited to team up with him on this adventure of restarting our lives in the real world. All of my papers with phone numbers of family and friends, including Matt's family, were confiscated before I left when their security thugs raided my belongings. I tried to remember Matt's sister's name, who lived in Clearwater, Florida, but couldn't recall. I therefore called the information line asking for any number with Pesh. One number was for a Donna Pesh, so I tried that. I wasn't even positive that Matt was out yet, but thought the chances were pretty good that he was out, since he isn't the type to back down at all, and he is known to respond to threats with a bring it on disposition. Yeah, he said noon, he meant noon. The number I called went to an answering machine. I hung up without leaving a message. His sister Donna didn't know me and might not have been aware that Matt was even leaving the Sea Org. I searched for other numbers but came up blank. I later found out that, concurrent with my arrival home in Seattle to reconnect with my family, Matt was going through a similar experience. The staff security officer took him to the Greyhound bus station in Tampa. He was given a ticket to Dade City, Florida, where his folks live. Of course, the money for his ticket was deducted from the $500 severance pay. When they got to the bus station, Kathy True was there. She came over and handed Matt an SP declare order. He put it in his pocket. She asked, "Aren't you going to read it?" Matt said, "No, I've seen my share of these in the past, and they're always full of exaggerations and lies." Yeah, usually he just puts that kind of thing right through the shredding machine. I'm glad he saved it. I still have it. It's on goldenrod. It's 2 pages long. It's bigger than mine. We'll have to do a video on our SP declares one of these days. Matt told Kathy that it would help for me to get released as soon as possible since we planned to team up and restart our lives together. Kathy said she didn't know anything about my handling. A bald faced lie, as she had just put me on an airplane to Seattle. Why do these guys do this? They didn't want us to find each other. Scientology is such a cult. Matt took the bus to Dade City, Florida, where his parents live. They picked him up at the bus station and were overjoyed when Matt told them he had left the Sea Org permanently. Matt's parents have never been in Scientology, but all four of their children were Scientologists. Matt had been in the Sea Org for 27 years, and they hadn't expected that would change. Matt briefed them on his decisions and plans. He called his brother and sister and informed them of his status. He told them that at that point he did intend to eventually get back in good standing so he could reconnect up with the whole family again. But for now, he was moving up to Seattle to marry me and restart our lives together there. His sister Donna told Matt that she got a phone call with no message left, but it was a Seattle area code number, which may have been me trying to contact him. She gave Matt the number and he called. I heard my dad yell out from the other room, "Amy, get in here. Matt's on the phone." I ran to the living room, picked up the phone, and said, "Matt?" He said, "Hi, Amy, it's me." In a ball of enthusiasm, I asked, "Are you out? Where the hell are you? Are you okay? When did you leave? How did you find me? When can you be here?" He just laughed, barely able to get a word in edgewise. I was just so happy to hear his voice and finally make contact. Matt booked himself on a flight out of Florida to Seattle. I was counting down the hours until he arrived. My dad and his wife, Marty, took me to the airport to pick up Matt. I was jumping up and down with excitement and anticipation of starting our newfound freedom together. Time seemed to stand still as I waited. I told my dad that Matt is 6 foot 4 inches tall, muscular, and as handsome as could be. Every time my father would see a person over 6 feet tall coming down the ramp, he would ask, "Is that him?" It was funny. Then I saw him. "Here he comes, Dad," I said as I pointed into the crowd. Matt seemed to tower over everyone else in the corridor. As soon as he could see me through the bustle of people departing the plane, Matt got a huge smile on his face. We were finally reunited. Man, that picture in my mind is as clear as day. Now the fun began. Matt and I were like little kids in a gigantic candy store. We walked around my dad's neighborhood and the local stores in total exhilaration. We went to the local grocery store and bought root beer and ice cream to make root beer floats, one of my favorite treats as a kid. We rented a bunch of movies that we had never seen, like Forrest Gump. We took a bus to downtown Seattle and got our marriage license, then arranged a small wedding at my dad's house with immediate family in attendance. I didn't have anything special to wear, but that didn't matter. I was in love and so excited about the future. Matt and I were married on 13 March 2005. My dad was able for the first time to walk his daughter down the aisle to give me away. He was so funny about it. Halfway up the aisle, we were on the grass in his backyard. He turned around and pretended to start walking the opposite way, saying, "Nope, I'm never giving her away again." We all laughed as I assured him once again not to worry because I was home for good. I'll include a few pictures of our wedding here so that you can see it. On our wedding night, my mom helped me cook my first homemade dinner. I put on an apron and went to work making pork chops with mushroom sauce, rice, not instant rice, asparagus, and a real apple pie. It must have turned out okay because I didn't hear one complaint and everyone cleared their plates. Now it was time to find some work. Matt and I found an ad in the newspaper for a hiring service, so we went to see them. We were immediately hired at a packaging company called Allpack Incorporated. That was great work for us because we were able to work together and it didn't require a lot of skill. It definitely kept us physically fit, building huge boxes on a fast assembly line. We bought a broken down van and installed another transmission in it. Luckily, my stepmother's brother was a mechanic. I think he was a home taught mechanic, but regardless. Now we had a job and wheels. We then found an apartment in my hometown of Auburn, which is about 10 miles east of my dad's house and 10 miles west of my mom's. It was right on the Green River and close to Dick Scobee Elementary School and airport, which were named in honor of my uncle. Once we earned enough money, we moved in. It's a funny story about how we got that apartment because we had no credit at all. And, if you looked up our social security numbers, it basically says we exist, but we really don't exist. There's nothing on it. And here we are in our mid 40s, with absolutely nothing on our social security number. And, but the fact was the owner of this apartment complex had a son named Mark and a daughter named Amy, and Matt's legal name is Mark and I'm Amy. And so she was like, and I was a Scobee as well. And, this apartment complex, it was just down the street from Dick Scobee Airfield. So she let us in, which was amazing, basically with one pay stub. As we sat on the floor together in the living room of our unfurnished little apartment in Auburn, Matt and I just hugged each other and laughed and laughed. We were free, we were together, and we were happy. My stepmother and I were out buying dishes and towels and looking around for things to furnish our new apartment with when we stumbled upon a discount store that was selling used furniture for practically nothing. We brought Matt and my dad back to this place with Dad's truck and our van, and we picked up several pieces of furniture. Some of the pieces we had to fix up a bit, but we knew how to do that in our sleep. Pretty soon we had a completely furnished, beautiful apartment, which cost almost nothing to put together. We were so resourceful, I can tell you. We told a few people at work about what we had done. Soon we started getting requests for specific things like dressers and coffee tables. That sparked off an idea in Matt's mind. What if we sold our newly acquired furniture to them for a bit of a profit? And so we did. Matt and I quickly converted the living room of our apartment into a shop with tarps on the floor and furniture being fixed up for resale. We even took turns at night to wake up and put the next coat of varnish on the furniture so it would be ready in the morning. In short order, Matt and I stockpiled a bunch of really nice furniture and drove around town to see where we could possibly have a garage sale to sell everything we had accumulated. Yeah, because we lived in an apartment complex, we needed a driveway, right? We found a really busy street in Auburn and pulled over to check it out. I walked over to a house on a corner lot and knocked on the door. An elderly gentleman came across the street and said that the house was bought by a tire company for its future expansion. I thanked him for the information and asked the gentleman where he lived. Surprised, he turned and pointed to the house directly across the street. I looked over and saw a nice house with a huge driveway. I said that it may be an odd question, but would he mind if my husband and I had a garage sale on his property over the Memorial Day weekend that was coming up? I told him that we lived in a nearby apartment and had accumulated several nice pieces of furniture but had no place to sell them from. He agreed. With a prime location nailed down, Matt and I went to work scooping up as much furniture as we could and fixing it all up in preparation for the upcoming weekend. We built up so much inventory from that discount store that we had to rent a storage space to hold it all. Memorial Day weekend arrived, and we got up at the crack of dawn to set everything up. We posted signs, unloaded and nicely set up the furniture, placed price tags on everything, etc. We held the garage sale for 5 straight days and sold nearly everything and took in $5,200. Yeah, I kept a log of every single thing that we sold, and it was $5,200 in those 5 days. Um, and I remember we ran out of furniture so fast that I would stay and sell at the garage sale while Matt went to other people's garage sales and then just bought up everything and came back and unloaded. It was such a perfect location. It was right off a main drag in town, but anyway. And then Matt, like, took this beautiful wood crib, and then put it on the corner with a huge sign saying, um, "Garage sale" with an arrow, so people would see that, like, it would stand out, and, uh and it was a beautiful wood crib, and, people would see that and then pull over and come in, and, anyway, we hustled and we made a lot of money doing that. We saw that there was a huge demand for good quality used furniture, so we took the plunge and quit our jobs at Allpack and went into the furniture business. It has been a complete blessing, which has provided us with a comfortable life and the means to visit family in both Washington and Florida. Yeah, when I wrote this, we were still doing that job. One day, Matt and I decided to find out from the church what would be needed for us to get back in good standing so we would have no restraints put on family members being allowed to speak to us. We didn't care if we never did one more service in Scientology ourselves, but our families were broken up because of our quote unquote status. There are a series of steps one has to take if they leave Scientology and get declared a suppressive person. One of the first steps is to pay a freeloader bill for the training and processing we received while on staff. Yeah, as if our 27 years of constant around the clock work wasn't enough, right? As both Matt and I had extensive training and had advanced up the OT levels to OT7, one step from the very top, we knew the bill was not going to be minor. We sent off our request to find out how much we owed on our freeloader bill. After a lot of waiting and nudging, finally we received a partial bill for Matt. Combined with my bill, we estimated we'd be required to pay over $250,000. hmm To say that that was never going to happen is an understatement. That just sealed the deal. They're making it impossible for us to handle this status situation, so they were never going to see a single penny from us. Realized we had no medical insurance, no retirement, hadn't paid into Social Security, and we were just trying to start our lives in our mid to late 40s. Yeah. And so you want to take our money? Any money that we make needs to go to you, Scientology, after 27 years of working our butts off and cooperating to get out in good standing. You had to declare us and then demand like $250,000 for us to get back in good standing and hold our family members for ransom. Yeah, not going to happen. Meanwhile, I started finding former INT-based staff members on the internet. There was an ex-Sea Org website where I found lots of my old friends. We started sharing our stories about leaving the church and what we were up to now. The Office of Special Affairs monitors this website to find out who is connecting with who. I started getting emails, letters, and phone calls from OSA and the International Justice Chief saying that if I ever planned to get back in good standing, I needed to get off that site. Mhm. I stopped taking their threatening calls and shredded their messages. It was refreshing to hear from old friends. These were people with whom I shared a common reality and some I had closely shared my life with for decades. It was exciting to find out where people ended up and how they were creating their new lives. It was also fascinating to see that I wasn't the only one having Sea Org dreams, more like nightmares, every night since leaving. The internet was allowing the veterans that Miscavige had declared and scattered to the winds to reunite. I had several people ask me about the status of family members they had left behind when they escaped or were kicked out, and I provided them with any information I could. For example, Andre Tabayoyan contacted me for any information about his son Kasavius. I told him that I was there when Miscavige ordered that Kasavius was to change his name, he's now Michael Probilski, and be shipped off to Copenhagen, Denmark, so he was out of the country. Miscavige wanted to get back at the parents for having spoken out against the church and make their child inaccessible to them. Oh, yeah. Andre stood up to David Miscavige and then blew from the base. And Miscavige was so pissed off with him that he took his son and sent him to Europe. But by the way, David Miscavige, the family is now reunited again. So, ha ha. Another person named Pablo asked me for information regarding his children. He had been suddenly kicked out of the Sea Org by Miscavige for an overdue renovations project on a church in New York City. I let Pablo know that I heard that his son was working in Los Angeles and that his daughter had been sent to Sydney, Australia. OSA saw this open forum for ex-Sea Org members as a possible threat to the church and worked aggressively to try to stop it. In fact, they turned Pablo into an agent for them, with the bribe that if he works with them covertly against former members, he will be allowed to speak to his children. More culty cult stuff. This guy's name is Pablo Labato, and he became a spy for Scientology because they were dangling his children over his head. Another one of my previous friends named Wolfie also reported to OSA as part of the steps he needed to get back in good standing. He would scan through the various chat groups and report back with who was connected to who. He even attempted to tell me via phone and email who I should and should not be associating with and urged me to pay my bill to get back in good standing with Scientology again. Wolfie Frank. I'll show you a picture of him. He was at a group get-together. Mark Headley was there, Claire Headley, and Jeff Hawkins, and a bunch of other people. And Wolfie was there to report on all of our conversations back to OSA. Total scumbag. He informed OSA what my contact information was when we moved. More orders then came from the church to cease communicating with certain individuals who were also declared like me, but more disaffected and spreading bad news about the church on the internet. Matt and I wrote an official letter to the church to let them know that we had no intention of getting back in good standing and we wished no further communication from them in the future. Yeah, in fact, it was a handwritten chicken scratch on a yellow notepad. That was our official letter. The pressure was then turned up. The Office of Special Affairs investigated and discovered that my mom had continued to see me despite orders from the church forbidding it. The church was putting her through a security check concerning leaving staff and added questions in order to find out any information they could about Matt and me. My mother did not cooperate and told them nothing. She said she refused to be interrogated about her daughter. She was not an informant. She was a mother and refused to be put into that position by the church. However, since her husband was still very dedicated to Scientology, my mom was threatened with the ultimatum that she had better formally disconnect from me or get declared a suppressive person and get divorced from her husband, Mark. What a choice. My mother is in her mid-60s. She is retired and depends on her husband of over 25 years, who she loves very much, for support. She would have nothing if she would divorce. Finally, the agreement was that she would disconnect from me so her husband, Mark, could continue in Scientology. My mom called me and said we had to meet. She came to my house, picked me up, and we drove up to a river in the mountains. We set up lawn chairs on the bank of a beautiful river, and she broke out a bottle of wine and poured us both a glass. I asked, "What did you bring me up here for, Mom? What's going on?" She began to sob. She told me she had no choice but to disconnect. Otherwise, she had no life, no place to live. She herself had spent nearly a decade as a church staff member in Seattle and had zero financial reserves. She also had a physical situation that would make it very difficult to support herself on her own. My mother was under so much stress because of being forced to choose between her husband and her daughter. She swore to me that she pledged never again to step foot in another Church of Scientology as long as she lived, as they ripped her heart out with this decision. But she can't just walk away from her husband. I told her I'd respect her decision and understand her position, but that I will become very vocal about the fact that Scientology tears families apart and this abuse has got to be stopped. We held each other and just cried. I have a picture of her sitting in the stream in this lounge chair, laying back, holding her glass of wine. I kept it for the longest time. I may have gotten rid of it because it brought back such bad memories, but if I have it, I'll include it here so you can see it. Boy, the pain is something that's not describable unless you've been through it. And what a choice. Your husband of 35 years or whatever it was, with your house and your support and your dogs and everything you know, or your daughter who you had, who is your daughter, you know? And, that Scientology thinks that they can just, dictate to you such a choice and enforce it on you. They are so ugly. They are such an ugly, ugly cult. But anyway, you know that. Oh boy. This pain is something I do not wish anyone to ever have to experience. It's like part of you is dying while you watch your closest friend and loved ones slip away. I tried to carry on as usual. My in laws were staying with Matt and me at the time, and I tried to keep a happy face. They already had to endure the breakup of their own kids, and the last thing I wanted to do was spread around any more grief. I couldn't even bring myself to tell Matt that this occurred because I knew I'd start bawling out of control. The next day, Matt's mom, Eileen, and I were relaxing in the hot tub, and she perceived something was up. She asked what was wrong. That question opened the floodgates, and I started to cry. I must have cried with hardly a breath for about 5 minutes straight, while Eileen held me so I wouldn't just slip down into the water. When I could finally get enough control to talk, I told her what happened. She said, I pray every day for our families to be back together. We've got to live for today and take it one day at a time. That's the only way we'll make it through the worst of these times. Live for today. This advice kept me going. About 2 months later, I received a phone call from my aunt, Colleen Albert, who has never been a Scientologist and lives less than a mile from my mom. To my heart-wrenching dismay, she reported that my mother had become so depressed about having to be separated from me that she was literally concerned that she might become suicidal. I sat on the other end of the phone line and let this news sink in for a moment as I quickly went from being shocked at how bad this enforced disconnection had affected my mother to being absolutely livid. I thought, that's it. They have just crossed the line with me. No church, quote unquote, has the right to break up families and step in between loved ones. I told Aunt Colleen to please get my mom to call me immediately and thanked her profusely for alerting me. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I decided right then and there that the chains of the church were off and the gloves were going on. A few minutes later, my phone rang. I know that the saying is the gloves are going off or whatever. The gloves are coming off or whatever it is. But anyway, you get the idea of what I meant. I was going to fight. Um, Now, when I say a few minutes later, my phone rang, it wasn't my mom. It was the Saint Petersburg Times. They were doing a story with Marty Rathbun about the abuse at Scientology's headquarters by David Miscavige. And they wanted me to corroborate what Marty was saying. And I said yes. I flew out to Florida from Washington and I sat there in an interview, which I put those interviews on my YouTube channel so that you can see them. And you can see my frame of mind because my Aunt Colleen had just told me how badly the disconnection was affecting my mom. But that's when the open exposure of Scientology as a cult started for me. We had been putting out stories under the radar by this time, and yeah, and Tommy Davis at this time also got onto CNN and said that there was no such thing as disconnection. Oh my word. They just don't know how to not lie. Anyway, so at that point, I was done. I was fed up. I was going to get my mom back. I was going to fight. I was going to expose every damn thing that I knew about that cult. And so that journey began. This ends this book. That is the last chapter, and I'll read you the epilogue now. Epilogue. This is not the end of the story, but the beginning to the next chapter of my life. By no means is my story unique in the upper echelons of Scientology. The abuse and forced separation of families continues, as is evident by the growing number of people leaving the church. There is life and love outside the organization. My family and friends readily welcomed me home after 27 years of virtual absence from their lives. There is also a huge network of former members who share a priceless friendship. All we wanted was to be a driving force for good and make a difference on the planet. There are still many worthwhile activities one can do for the betterment of humanity if one chooses. My mission right now is to help expose the abuse and human rights violations within the Church of Scientology to hopefully bring it to an end. To follow the story as it continues to unfold or to order additional copies of this book, Scientology Abuse at the Top, please visit my website at www.scobee-publishing.com. The end. And not the end. I started writing another book, which is everything that happened from that second forward. Because a lot has happened and transpired since that time. Just a whole whirlwind of media and private investigators and fair game attacks from Scientology, and it's been a war. But it is something that I will fight until Scientology is forced to stop their oppression. And that's going to be when they close because their policies have to be followed to the letter. And, that's just the way they are. They can't change unless they're shut down and forced to stop. Anyway, thank you for being on this journey with me through the chapters of my book, Scientology Abuse at the Top. If you'd like your own copy of the book, you can order it at my website, which is scobee-publishing.com. You know, it was really interesting going back through all of this and seeing it again newly. It's like reliving it again. It's almost too much to bear a little bit. Because there's a lot of pain to recall, and there are a lot of scars. It was interesting to see in my heart how unhealed I am over certain situations. But I'll just keep speaking out and keep writing, keep talking, and using my voice to expose Scientology. Thank you again for being here. Until next time, you guys. Bye.